So if you have it in your heart where you truly want to create a life for yourself that you don't have now, then be prepared, have some money in the bank, be committed to your vision, as Jason said. That's why they call him the real Jason Duncan, by the way. And then from there, make some decisions about what happens if this idea fails. Now, truthfully, you won't know until it does what will actually happen or where you will go. But be prepared for that to happen because odds are it will.
Well, thank you, Mitch. And I appreciate you giving that insight. I 100% agree. And for that entrepreneur out there who's wanting and waiting and guessing, there's some advice. Rewind this on your podcast player, go back on YouTube, rewatch this, listen to what Mitch said there. There's gold in that advice.
In today's ultra-competitive business world, being a successful entrepreneur or business owner can be very challenging. Fortunately, contemporary times have blessed us with resources for tackling those challenges and getting us to success more quickly than we could have imagined. Welcome to The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan, a podcast that explores how the world's most powerful entrepreneurs grow incredible companies. This podcast looks at the 5 keys to unlocking success as an entrepreneur. A successful educator turned entrepreneur, Jason's mission is to use his gifts of teaching and leadership to help others get the results they want out of life. Join Jason every week and learn the keys to grow a truly successful business.
Welcome to The Root of All Success. I'm the real Jason Duncan. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, please go to your favorite podcast player. Perhaps you're listening on it right now with your headphones or in the car or wherever you happen to be. Hit the subscribe button. And honestly, too, if you can leave us a review, a 5-star review helps a lot because what it does is it pushes us up in the podcast player algorithm so that more people can hear us. And I want more people to have access to this great golden content about how so many entrepreneurs, like the one we're going to talk with today, got to be successful. And I do believe that there are these 5 things that happen in everybody's life about success. And on most episodes, I actually dig through those 5 things. On today's episode, I don't specifically do that because, as you'll see, his story goes through some very specific things that we're going to focus in on. But either way, we're going to talk about how he became super successful and how you, by using his wisdom and advice, can also become successful. Every week, I typically record this at the Standard at the Smith House in downtown Nashville, live and in person. With some of my guests, we are smoking cigars and drinking bourbon. But today, my guest is coming to us via Zoom, and we're doing this. He's in Florida. I'm here in Nashville. Actually, I'm coming from my home office in Gallatin, Tennessee. So you can see behind me, this is my home office, and we're going to be doing this by Zoom. And so I prefer to do them in person, but sometimes it just, the scheduling wise, I want to get the guests on sooner than later. And our guest today wasn't able to come to Nashville to get it done at the schedule that I wanted. So we're doing it by Zoom because I didn't want to leave you out of the opportunity to hear his genius and his success story. The podcast sponsor for today, this episode sponsor is 19. That's ONENINE. 19. You probably might not have heard of them, but let me ask you a question. Have you ever had your website go down and you're really not sure what happened? Have you ever had updates that you needed to make to your website? Maybe a new employee just started, or you've got a new offer that or coupon you want to put on there, or maybe you've got an address change or a phone number change and you didn't know who to call because the person who designed your website's no longer in business. Have you ever wondered how to make your website more SEO attractive? That's what everybody seems to talk about. Is it SEO optimized for the search engines? Well, you probably need to reach out to 19. Why would I say you probably do? Because you, like me, got to have websites that work. I hired 19 to handle my website, therealjasonduncan.com. And ever since I hired them to manage my site, things have gotten so much better. I've actually gotten leads coming through the website, through the contact forms. All of the grammar is correct. The pictures and the photos are updated and they're optimized so it doesn't take forever for the page to load. All of these happen when you hire 19. 19 can manage, host, secure, update, and keep your website current without you having to go out to some third party who's going to charge you thousands and thousands of dollars to do something that you don't really need all that done. You just need your website hosted, managed, and updated. So they take existing websites just like yours and take them to the next level for one low monthly flat fee. They'll have one person dedicated to your account, takes care of your site on a regular basis. So go to managemywebsites.com. That's managemywebsites, plural.com/root, as in root of all success, for a special that'll give you $600 a year off of that subscription service. Managemywebsites.com/root. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about the guest for today. My guest started his entrepreneurial journey in the software business back in 1985. And as you're going to hear today, his story is pretty amazing, because when he started building the software to when it actually blew up in the mid 80s on PCs that would cost $5,000. He got that company to breaking records in the industry and doing some amazing things and being noticed by some of the top publications in the country about software, which led him to get noticed by someone named Chet Holmes, who led him to get noticed by someone named Tony Robbins. So he ended up going into business with Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins. And you're going to see how that all played together exactly as we talk through in our story today on the podcast. But he built that company, Timeslips, back in the mid 80s, ended up selling it to Sage Corporation, where he stayed on as the COO for a few years. And then he went on to help Intuit QuickBooks set up their certification program. So if you've ever worked with a QuickBooks certified person, our guest today was behind setting up that concept as a certification program. And now that's part of what he does, is helping people set up certification programs for their own companies. And that's actually what I'm working on with him right now. He's my coach. He's my friend. I've had the pleasure of hiring him to be my business coach for quite some time now. And he's helped bring to fruition not only the Root of All Success as a podcast, but my online university, Results University, my coaching platform. He's been very, very instrumental in everything that I've been able to do. And I want to welcome to the show my friend and my coach, Mitch Russo. Welcome to the show, Mitch.
Is this the real Jason Duncan?
Of course. There's no
other.
There is
Great
no
to
other.
Be here. That's
well,
great
it's
to
good.
be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And I want to kind of start by saying this, because I know the listeners, a lot of my listeners are very loyal and they listen to every episode. As a matter of fact, I've had listeners come back and tell me that I need to be releasing more episodes, which is why I started releasing 2 episodes a week. And who knows, I might go more. But what they don't know, what I haven't talked about yet, is why am I doing a podcast to begin with? And I'm going to, since you're here today, we're going to talk a little bit about this, and then we're going to get directly into your story. But I want to let everybody know, and also you kind of know this, but I want to make it public, and thank you for this, is that I wanted to do a podcast for a long, long time, but I never did it. You know, I never launched it. And I've got all kinds of reasons and excuses that should not really make any difference, but I had those excuses. But I hired you as a coach, and you were the one that actually pushed me over the start line. It's time to get started. So the Root of All Success is in large part due to your coaching and helping me get it going. So thank you for that. This wouldn't happen without you. So thank you for your encouragement to do it.
You're very welcome. And I couldn't have encouraged you to do it if the brilliance wasn't there to begin with. So that's all you. All I did was create a simple way to enable you to be who you are on the air. And that's what you did. Great job.
Well, thank you. Well, we were introduced through some mutual connections. You live in Florida, I live in Tennessee. We were introduced through some mutual connections. And I remember the first time we talked on the phone, I was actually sitting on the beach in Florida, not anywhere close to where you lived.
Right.
And the wind was blowing something terrible. And I had kind of a towel over my head. And I was doing a Zoom call on my phone and drinking a pina colada. And then I got off the call with you and was like, well, that guy's pretty impressive. And you didn't say anything about your background. We were just kind of getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And then later I kind of looked you up and I'm like, holy crap. I owe that guy a lot more attention than sitting on a beach drinking a pina colada under a towel. So that's when we got reconnected and ultimately hired you as a coach. But the show here is about how you became so successful as an entrepreneur. So start with just how you began your entrepreneur journey.
Well, I would say that, for many of us, being an entrepreneur starts as a little boy, starts as a little girl. It starts in our youngest years. And it comes from seeing other people who we admire do something like this. So my dad has always been an entrepreneur. He started candy businesses all over New York City. And I watched as he brilliantly marketed his wares, sometimes right on the street with me. And I learned that selling is not something you do to someone, it's something that you do for them. And I saw that demonstrated over and over again in his work and the way he conducted himself. So it was later on that I did things like wash cars, sold Christmas cards and Hanukkah cards door to door. I shoveled snow in the winter, which was very lucrative. My mom said, Mitch, money's raining from the sky. You want to get out there? Because, my allowance was about 50 cents, but I could make $25, $30 a day shoveling snow, which was a huge, huge amount of money back when you're 11, 12 years old. And then later in high school, I was not what you'd call a popular kid. I was small. I wasn't as big as the other kids who were all into sports. I was not into sports. So I figured, you know what? I love music. Why don't I start a band? And the reason I started the band was, in fact, to pick up girls. That was the purpose of doing it. And in fact, I was so determined that I took guitar lessons for 2 years before I even began the process of getting together with other people and playing. So, and that really shows you how determined I am. Sometimes you got to be really determined if you set your eye on a goal and you go for it. So it really started back when I was a little boy.
Well, I think the story that you shared there is very similar to so many successful entrepreneurs, that they can go back to their childhood and talk about mowing grass or shoveling snow or raking leaves or walking dogs. There was another episode I did with a guest. He talked about like his first deal was watering plants for neighbors who were out of town on vacation. Right. So I think so many of us have that entrepreneurial bug planted as a young kid, and it doesn't take root. That seed actually doesn't grow until some other event happens in life. So for you, you didn't go from that as a child doing the snow and the rain and the, all that stuff that you were doing as a kid. But like, when did that seed actually turn into, I'm going to go start a company?
Well, informally, it was the band. And the reason I say that is because we get together to jam on Saturday afternoons. But I always saw it as a way to make money. But the problem is my buddies weren't serious enough about it. So I basically sat everyone down one day and said, look, if we're going to do this, we got to do it right. And so the bottom line is that much of what I did at the age of 15 and 16 to create that band are the foundations of what I did to create every business thereafter. And because there were pillars, I think of them now. I didn't think of it back then, but I think back and said, well, look, we insisted on quality. You had to have a quality product. I then spread the word, which is you got to have PR. I then made sure that we raised our price every time we played. So I did price testing. At that point, got involved with picking up a clipboard and a pen and getting testimonials after every show so I could show them to the next person. So, I look back and I go, oh my goodness, I did the thing I was doing later in life as I began my real company, which was Timeslips Corporation.
Yeah. So the band, what was the band's name?
Absolutely Free.
So did you use that kind of as a way to get bookings? Like, we are absolutely free.
Well, the band was named after Frank Zappa's first album, where Frank stood in front of the Cafe Wa in Greenwich Village, handing out his album to people who basically walked by. And I love that album so much, and we all did. So we just named the band after the album. It became an impediment later when we tried to sell our services, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Well, so now when you go later, much later in life, you start Timeslips. What was Timeslips' main thing? Like, what was it that you did? What was the product or service that you offered?
We offered software to help people keep track of time. And we did it in a very innovative way. My partner in the business was a brilliant programmer, and he had already been, he'd authored 5 other different programs, but on the Apple II platform, never on a PC. And I went to him, and we were neighbors. He just moved in, and we started having breakfast together, found out we were great friends, had a lot in common. In fact, I literally 2 weekends ago was best man at his wedding. So we've stayed friends all these years. That's a fast forward right there. And so I shared him this idea of keeping track of time. And 6 weeks later, he called me up to his office, which was literally next door. And he said, I want to show you something. And sure enough, he had pretty much built what I had envisioned, but on the Apple II platform, of which it was useless. It needed to be on the PC. So I got very excited. I said, hey, do you want to start a company? And he said, yep. And just like that, it wasn't even 2 seconds of thought. He said, yep, let's do it. So we both put $5,000 into a bank account, went to see a lawyer, got a partnership agreement drawn up, went to the bank after that and we took our first loan to buy a copy machine. Now, there was a strategy behind this because I knew at some point we may need to borrow money, and I wanted to get to know our local banker and develop a banking relationship. So that loan was for $2,200. We bought a copy machine and paid that loan back on time, of course. And the fruits of that initial meeting ended up being $1 million line of credit 7 years later. So that is one of the things that I stumbled into and kind of did right, because I knew at some point we're going to need to have that type of relationship. But the goal of the company was to help people keep track of time. And in particular, as the company evolved, lawyers keep track of time. Now, one of the things we first did when we created the product is we marketed it to all of eternity. We took out 2 big ads in PC Magazine, which were total flops. We spent $6,000 on 2 ads in PC Magazine and only sold 5 copies at $99 a copy. But about a month later, the salesman who sold us the ads comes to my house. The whole company was operating in my garage. And he said, I'm real sorry about that. I'm sorry it didn't work. Oh, by the way, here's these 500 bingo leads. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you know that card in every magazine with all the numbers on it? Well, people go through the magazine and they circle the number next to the ad so that you might send them more information. He says, they're generally pretty worthless, so don't count on getting anything from them, but I'm obligated to give them to you. And I thought to myself, well, look, we just spent all of our money and it was a complete bust. So why don't I call them all and find out why they circled our number? And in the process of doing so, I sold another 30 copies of the software, which was fine. More importantly, that was my market research. I ended up making a couple of hundred calls and I realized that the people who started those bingo leads were mostly lawyers. So now I said, why don't we shift our strategy, which is also a lot less expensive? Let's market just to lawyers. And that's really where we began our efforts to understand the legal market. Now, we had some insight into the legal market because we had an incredible attorney, very entrepreneurial. He became my mentor before he passed away. And his name was Ned Salzberg. And what ended up happening was that I also got involved in a special interest group on CompuServe. I don't know if you ever heard of or remember CompuServe.
I do. I'm just old enough to remember CompuServe and Prodigy and all those guys.
Right. So I was in this group for lawyers, and it was a unique group because it was lawyers who used computers. That was a unique group back then. And I shared the fact that, hey, we're developing this system for lawyers to keep track of time on their desktop. And several of them piped right up and said, "Hey, we'd like to help you. Send us software. We'll check it out. We'll tell you how we can improve it." And it became like a group project inside this little special interest group. And slowly but surely, we kept adding features and features that they helped us uncover and direct us. And then the true hit the streets marketing had to happen, because we're still only selling 5 or 6 copies a week.
Wow. So Timeslips starts with you and another partner. Hey, you want to start a company? You start building software in 1985 on a PC platform. So in 85, we're talking IBM PC Junior, right? We're talking,
No, Junior came later. PC came first.
The PC came. Okay. So I remember having a PC Junior. I remember having a Commodore 64, a Tandy. Remember those? I've never had the Apples. I didn't actually move to Apple until 2002. Now everything's on Apple. But so you started this Timeslips, and you found quite by accident your niche. Your niche was attorneys. And ultimately, you ended up selling that company and staying on as COO of the acquiring company, Sage. Is that right?
Correct.
So how did that happen?
Well, what ended up happening was that I use the term lucky in air quotes here, because just as we were kind of running out of money and had, barely made enough to keep, basically keep our small level of expenses going, I flew to Las Vegas for CompuServe. And this was again in 1985. And it was October or November of 1985. And I walked about 1 million square feet of 10 buildings, 10 days. I walked the entire place. I brought 100 copies of the software with me, and was looking for influencers who might either be in the press or help us create bundle deals with hardware, or other software companies that would somehow, put it in their box, and anything I could find. And I came back feeling pretty defeated, because I'd given away 100 copies, but I had not really come back with any orders or anything like that. I'd spoken to the major software distributors, and they shooed me away like a fly buzzing around their heads. But one of those copies ended up landing in the hands of a senior writer at InfoWorld magazine. And at the time, InfoWorld was the most influential magazine in the software business. And so, but I did not know that. I don't remember even visiting the booth or seeing the guy who did it, who wrote the article, but he said that he remembered me. And what ended up happening was that we get a phone call about 6 months later, 5 months, 6 months later. He says, "We're doing a fact check." I said, "Oh, okay. What's a fact check?" And he goes, "Well, we're about to publish a review of your software." I said, "Who is this?" He said, "Oh, this is InfoWorld magazine." And now I get very excited. And of course, they ask me if my phone number is correct, if my address is correct, if the spelling of the software name is correct, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, yeah, we're going to be publishing a review. We just want to make sure we have the info right. I said, yeah, it's all right. I said, "Can you tell me a little bit about the review?" He goes, "No, that's not my department. All I do is fact checks." So I tell my partner, I said, "Look, this could be good news, or this could be the end of our company." Because InfoWorld is brutal when it comes to reviews. InfoWorld would, if they gave you a rating, and they rated from 0 to 10. So if you got like a 7, you should go out of business at that point. That was like a total fail. It's like damning with faint praise. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of okay. So we were terrified, because this is our first product. We were new in the business. We were up against all the big guys, Lotus Development Corporation, WordPerfect, all of the big providers, software company publishers. And then one morning, it was, I remember it very distinctly. It was a winter morning, and I was sleeping. And all of a sudden, all 6 of our little telephones started ringing. We had a ring over system where one phone was busy, it would ring the second one and the third. We had 6 of those. Talk about being optimistic, right? So the phone started ringing off the hook at 6 a.m. So I run down in my underwear with a pencil and a stack of paper, and I said, "Yes, hi, I'd like to place an order for Timeslips." I said, yes, sir. What is your shipping address and your credit card? And the phones are all ringing. And finally, I was doing this for 2 hours, and people were calling back because they couldn't get through the first time. Finally, I said, well, where did you read it? Where did you find out about this? He goes, oh, you don't know? I said, no. He goes, yeah. There was an incredible review of your software in InfoWorld. I said, what did they rate us? He says, well, it says here they rated you the highest they've ever in software, 9.3. The only other company to ever receive a 9.3 was WordPerfect. I said, oh, well, now it's 2 hours later. I'm still in my underwear. And now we had our junior hire start to come in, and my partner started to come about 8 a.m. And I said, quick, just get on the phone, start taking orders. A little later in the afternoon, I got a phone call from the software distributors like Kenphil and Ingram Micro. And so Kenphil placed an order for 600 copies. Ingram Micro placed an order for 300 copies. And then we got a call from Egghead Discount Software, and they placed what they called a pilot order for 500 copies. Now you got to remember, we're used to selling 6 copies a week. And now our world explodes.
Well, let me interject, because I know a lot of listeners are much younger, and they're thinking, what in the world is a copy of software? Like that doesn't, because so we don't even live in that universe anymore. I know what you're talking about, right. But what does a copy of software even look like? How do you place an order for 600 copies of software?
Well, back then everyone was on floppy disks, or 3.5-inch discs that weren't very floppy. And so what we would do when we would release software is we would take our master disk to the duplication house, and 3 days later, we would get boxes and boxes of our finished product. So they would take the discs, they would label them, they would assemble them with the manual and shrink wrap them together, and that would become a thing, a product.
Yeah. So your software is not downloadable. This was, you had to have a physical copy of this software. So right. You were used to doing 6 a week, and now you're taking several thousand in one morning.
Right. Well, in 1 week. It was basically 1 week, we had sold several thousand, and it was not going to stop, because once it got into Egghead, it got even bigger.
Wow. So when was there a moment during that process that you were like saying to your partner, holy crap, this is actually going to work?
No, it's funny you mentioned that, because we used to have a joke. For all those months, we kept saying, well, this isn't really like a real company. It's just kind of a hobby, right? And he goes, yeah, it's just a hobby. And we used to say that to entertain each other. And I remember at the end of that week, the dust had settled. We had this stack of orders. We had just, told the disc duplicator, who was in Salem, Massachusetts at the time, that we're going to need 3,000 copies of the software. And the guy says, well, I don't have that many floppy disks. I have to order more. So we were at the end of the week, and one of the rituals that he and Neil and I used to get into every so often is we'd go for Mexican food on Friday night at the end of the week. And I was sitting there in the Mexican restaurant, and I said to him, I guess we're a real company now, aren't we? And he said, yeah, I guess we are. And so we moved from my little garage place into our first rented space, 1,800 square feet.
Wow. So you started the company in 85. What year did that review go out and all this start happening?
It actually happened in 1985.
So everything so you started from concept to explosion really happened within 12-month period.
Well, we started creating the software in 1984.
Oh, gotcha.
Oh, and it was ready to go in 1985, but we had a misstep. See, the original idea, Jason, was not to create time and billing software for lawyers. The original idea was to create time tracking software so that you, as a personal computer owner, can attach a record of its contemporaneous use to your tax return so you could deduct the expense of your hardware.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious?
Well, that's the problem we set out to solve, because I wanted to deduct my own PC, which was $5,000, My accountant said, well, no, the IRS thinks computers are toys. You can't deduct it unless you have a record of its usage. So I said, is that a ruling? He goes, yeah, let me send it to you. And so, 3 days later, it comes in the mail and I read it over. There was the word contemporaneous usage. So I said to Neil, listen, this is what we'll do. And by the time we had finished creating the system to do that, we had already written the manual. We had basically tested the software, and he and I both quit our jobs. So at that point where it's like, now it was the following Monday, we quit our jobs on Friday. The following Monday, we're sitting there and we get this news that the IRS has relaxed the ruling on contemporaneous record keeping. And that's when we got upset and angry and pissed off. And at that point, we said, you know what? We have to pivot. Who else needs time tracking software? And after hours and hours, we figured, you know what? If we add more features to the input screen, the client field, everybody can use it. And that was the idea we started with. And by the way, if that original idea had succeeded, we would have had a tiny little company that would have evaporated in no time. But because that failed and we pivoted into what we did, that allowed us to create the massive success that we did.
Well, isn't that the story of entrepreneurs? I mean, entrepreneurs rarely start with one idea in mind and ride that into the millionaire sunset. Most entrepreneurs like you, like me, we start with one concept and we think, okay, this is going to be great. And then shortly into the process, we discovered that that original idea is not going to work. And that really kind of reminds me of this thing that I teach my coaching students, is this commitment to vision. Like your vision for what you want to create has to remain constant, but the strategy to get there is going to change. And if you're committed to strategy, you're committed to killing yourself. You're committed to killing the company, right? It's your strategy is just one way to execute the vision. You and Neil had a vision to create software that was going to help people track time. That was the point. Your initial strategy was, we're going to track time on this PC, which I find fascinating because I never knew that story. But your strategy changed when you realize, oh, well, the IRS is changing rules. So I that's the story of the entrepreneur. It's going to pivot. It's going to change. Now, I will say this too, just kind of for the benefit of the listeners, because I know, Mitch, you know this much better than I do. But as entrepreneurs, the tax law is written for us. Like the entire tax code is written for us as business owners to take advantage of appropriately, legally, ethically. It's not there are not, people call them loophole. It isn't a loophole. That's how it's written. If you use your computer for business use in the 1980s, the tax code says you can get a discount, but you have to track it. So that's not a loophole. That's the way it's written. And that's what I love about being an entrepreneur is, man, the tax advantages are amazing. And the W-2 employees get mad at us sometimes, but that's only because they don't understand. It's not because we're trying to cheat the system. And I didn't know that story about Timeslips. So I'm really happy to hear that it actually was a tax reason more than anything else. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. That's the same story that Fred Smith went through when he started FedEx. He originally created a FedEx. The purpose of the beginning of FedEx, the story of that.
Parts of it, but please go on.
So FedEx was presented as a thesis, a master's thesis, of which Fred Smith received a C on. And he went back to the professor and said, why did I get a C? And he goes, hey, your idea is to process bank checks on planes to cut down the time. It used to take 8 days to clear a check. And the reason is because they had to transport the physical paper checks to all the banks that issued the checks and then send them back to the bank that the check was written from. So what Fred Smith's idea was, you know what? How about if we put all of this processing equipment on big planes, load them up with checks, process them in the air, land at a hub, and then send them back out to the banks from the hub? Well, the professor said, brilliant idea, except the planes will never fly. The equipment's too heavy. The checks are too heavy. Go back to the drawing board. So now Fred Smith says, well, wait a minute. Oh, and apparently the story goes is that the professor said, you know, good idea, the hub. That is the essence of your idea. The part that really makes sense is the hub. No one's ever quite that out before, and you did. Where else? How else can you employ a hub distribution system where things fly in throughout the night or are distributed on the ground and then fly back out through the hub? That's when he came up with the idea of, why don't we just deliver packages?
Wow. No, actually, I did not know that story. That part of the story had escaped my information. I'd not heard that. That's very interesting. Again, the pivot. The pivot seems to be the theme. Like, you pivoted from
Exactly.
an original. So did Fred. So did I. Every entrepreneur I've had on this show probably could say the same thing.
Yep.
Well, you're not doing Timeslips anymore. You sold that company.
Yes.
So you sold the company, stayed on for a little while, continued to run it. But then long term, and I know there's lots in between, but how did you end up getting to work with Chet Holmes and then ultimately Tony Robbins? How did that come about? Because I know those two names are pretty famous names. People know them. So how did you get introduced, and then what did you guys do together?
Well, actually, Chet came to me back when I was still running and building Timeslips Corporation. Chet at the time was selling magazine ad space. That was his job. And he worked for Charlie Munger, or one of the people he worked for was Charlie Munger. And, Chet had a strategy. He used to call it the Dream 100 strategy. He'd pick his top 100 prospects and he would shower them with attention and gifts, because his belief was that if I work only on my top 100 prospects, I'll close 20 of them over the course of whatever time it was. Well, I was identified as one of his top prospects because we were exploding. We were growing really, really fast, and he wanted us as an advertiser. And so we had been an advertiser before with little classified ads and things like that. But now, look, I mean, it was time to hit, as in the circus parlance, it was time to hit the big time, the three rings, all three rings. So Chet came to me and proposed an idea. He said, look, I want you in the magazine. We're going to discount the price. And I said, nope, go away, you pushy salesman. And he just kept coming back and back and back and back until finally, between the two of us, we had negotiated a deal where I was not going to get a single page, but a double color spread in the center of the book, as they call it, for the price of a single black and white. And so he had to pull some strings, he says, to do that. But I almost did it to get rid of him because he wouldn't leave me alone. Well, that ad jumped our sales another 20%. So we were already growing pretty fast. But once that ad hit, we saw just more and more and more orders come in, until finally, Chet flew out of California to Massachusetts, took me to dinner. We had a bottle of champagne I didn't even drink. And we really cemented our friendship that night. He said to me, he goes, you and I, we're going to be good friends. You're going to see. And so he was right. We built a friendship over many, many years. As Timeslips grew, our advertising budget grew. Chet had first dibs on that because he always took care of us. And if something didn't work, he was always making good. He did whatever it took to make sure that we were taken care of and successful. Later, he held conferences where we were the center or part of one of the main presenters and things like that. So when we sold the company and I was now working for Sage, I brought Chet in as a speaker to help the sales team. So we paid him, his rate. Chet had a little coaching company himself, but we still stayed in touch. We talked every week. We talked philosophy. We talked God. We talked trust. We talked fate. Every week we had our scheduled call. And then I went through a very dark period of my life where Chet was very supportive of me and even brought us closer. So it wasn't that far into the future. It was about 2007 when Chet called me and said, look, I need some help. I'm having some difficulty here with my little coaching company. I know you have some experience with this. Can you help me? I said, of course. So I won't get into what I did or how I did it, but the bottom line was that at the end of 6 weeks, I said, okay, buddy, you're all set. He says, well, where are you going? I said, I did what you asked me to. I built you a sales organization, sales force, and I even picked out a good manager for you. So you should be all set. He goes, well, you're not going anywhere. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, well, I have this $18,000 check with your name on it. I said, Chet, we're friends. You don't have to pay me. He goes, no, I'm not paying you. That's your commission on all the people you hired and all the money that you get from their sales. So I said, oh, okay, well, you can send it, I guess, and at that point, he said, look, you just have to keep going. And I was basically helping him by recruiting salespeople for the company. Within 6 months, I had joined the company formally. I had built 2 new divisions. I then became president of the company. And it was around that time that Chet said to me, look, I finally got myself a conversation with Tony Robbins. And so what he did is he flew out to, I think it was Canada, where Tony might have had a house or he was staying. And he came back and said, Tony wants to talk to you and me on Thursday night. And I said, great. So Tony himself, get on the phone. I'll never forget it. I'm in Massachusetts. It was probably about 10 p.m. Eastern time. And Tony, Chet, and I got on the phone. It's the first time I ever got to actually talk to Tony Robbins. I had studied his materials. In fact, his CDs were instrumental in pulling me out of a bad emotional situation with an ex-wife. And so I was a little bit in shock and awe to have a chance to talk to the guy. But there we were on the phone together, trying to figure out how we can build the business together. And we did this almost every Thursday night for about 5 months. And then finally we agreed. And the way we were going to kick off our new relationship was to launch it at an event that we were going to create called the Ultimate Business Mastery Summit, UBMS. And when we had 7 weeks to put 500 people in that auditorium, it was I believe it was at the Mirage Hotel. And we did it in 7 weeks. We brought 500 people, 15 speakers. Chet and Tony dominated the course. And we recorded everything. Those recordings became the basis of our core product called the Ultimate Business Mastery System. And we basically used a strategy where we would advertise on the radio a chance to have a masterclass with us. And they would pay, at the time we started at $49, and they would attend this masterclass and they'd leave with a plan. But what we discovered is that after we had created the plan, we would ask people in the webinar, we'd say, well, how much was this plan worth to you? And some people would say $2 million. I mean, it was an incredible exercise. So at the end of that, we said, well, look, if we're able to deliver about $2 million in value for $49, imagine what we could do if we spent time together. And that's how we upsold our Ultimate Business Mastery System, which at the time was $4,000. So
what year was all this going on, Mitch?
This was going on in 2008, 2009.
Gotcha. And Chet built that to something significant, which is now kind of a cornerstone of what Tony's doing all over the world now, right?
Well, I don't want to take credit for what Tony's doing. I never would. I mean, Tony and I and Chet were partners in this business, but Tony's business is Tony's business, and he has shares in many different types of businesses, and he's contributed to many businesses. What we built was in a sense, a lead generation system for Tony. That was part of what what our little company was all about, Business Breakthroughs International. What Tony wanted out of the deal, besides getting great content, is he wanted to feed the rest of his business with all the leads we were generating on the radio. So we were initially starting to spend about $5,000 or $6,000 a month on the radio. And then I took over radio, and Chet really taught me radio. And I learned how to not only just create great ads, which I needed Chet's voice to do, but more importantly, how to monetize those ads and really make them profitable. So in a matter of about a year, we went about $6,000 a month to about $140,000 a month spend. And we were actually breaking even on a direct response radio ad, which we then, when I say breaking even, is remarkable because remember, we brought all those people into a webinar and we were selling them a seat in a webinar. But what was that we're getting about a 38% conversion in the webinar, $4,000 product. So yes, it's true. We broke even and sometimes lost a little money on the initial webinar sale. But we made it up in enormous amounts later as we upsold them the core product.
So today, Mitch, you're actually doing your own master classes, your own masterminds, your own coaching 101, your own groups. You're writing books. So what is it that you are focused most on today?
Well, I would say that if I were to break down my activity, it's in three areas. One is helping folks like you, hired clients who have a beautiful vision and I want to see it fulfilled. So I selectively help the right people that bring enormous value into the world, like you. I also work with a much higher end client who wants to build certification programs, which is the core topic of my book, Power Tribes. And then the thing that you might say, and the thing I polish like a pearl every day is software. I have released a SaaS platform for coaches based on solving the problems I have had as a coach. And so far, I've not seen anything like what I'm doing. And the software is slowly, on a grassroots way, starting to take off. And I'm getting all these great comments and reviews from people about how much they're enjoying the fruits of my labor creating this software. So those are the three things that I'm focused on right now.
Well, and I could speak to the software, and if you want to kind of give a little pitch for it, you're welcome to, because if you are coaching, I would say if you're coaching people online, like if you're meeting one-on-one through Zoom or some other platform, the software that you've got is absolutely 100% tailor-made for that, because you could type the notes in, you've got it automates activities and homework assignments, and you can respond through the software. It's phenomenal. So tell everybody about what that software is called and how to get access to it. Are you going to ship them a floppy disk, I guess, is the question we should ask.
I should, but no, it's a SaaS platform, software as a service. You sign up, you pay your nominal $20 a month, and you get access to the system with no limits. So let me go back, if I could, for a moment. I created this because just like I had a problem deducting my PC and I needed a solution, the reason I created Client Folio is because I had a problem that no other software could solve. I was spending a half an hour on admin between sessions, and that half hour was right in the middle of my day. That was my peak cognitive functional time that I was wasting on cleaning up notes and transferring things from window to window when I could have been coaching more people or focused on solutions. So I did a search. I couldn't find anything that works for me. So I did what I think all great entrepreneurs do when they hit a problem that there's no solution for, they solve it. So I wireframed what I thought of was a simple system, and I wrote up a spec, and I sent it out to a team that I've been working with for many years. And we built it together. They built software. I did, I made sure it fit my own needs. I started using it with my own clients back in February or March. And then as I noticed limitations, I would tell my team, we would fix the limitations. Now today, there's around 100 subscribers or so, and we haven't really begun marketing us. We're just now releasing our major re-release of the product. And now now it's really where I want it to be. And it's still just $19.97 a month. It's called Client Folio, and it's spelled client, FOL.io. And again, the whole purpose of it's just for coaches who coach one-on-one or one-to-many over Skype or Zoom.
Yeah, well, I want everybody to go take a look at that. Client Folio is the name of the software. And like you said, it's client, FOL.io. So .io is one of the newer, slugs on the back end of a URL these days, but it's .io. So client, FOL.io for Client Folio. So go take a look at that. Well, Mitch, this conversation is great because we know each other. I mean, you've been coaching me now for quite some time, and so we spend a lot of time together. Well, honestly, though, it's mostly about me because that's what that's what you're supposed to do. If I had been paying you to hear your story all the time, I probably wouldn't be paying you much more longer. But hearing the details of your story really is encouraging, and the whole idea behind the root of all success is that I think that if you go back and look at people's stories, that these things continue to pop up. And I think that, normally I kind of go through the 5 keys. I don't do it in every episode. You're very familiar with it because you and I talk about it all the time. But what I see in your story, maybe a little how they play into those 5 keys a little different, is that idea of pivoting, like commitment to your vision, but change the strategy. That law of adaptation, that we're going to adapt better than we can plan, kind of plays into this. Like our ability to adapt is always going to outperform our ability to plan. And you and Neil had plans on what you were going to do with that software, and to see it pivot and explode because of what you were able to do in that pivot, and that commitment to the vision stayed true. The strategies changed. I think is great. Also, I think knowing the right people. I think Neil was a right person. Chet's a right person. There was probably all kinds of other people who played into your story about knowing the right people, being in the right place at the right time, talking about going to that trade show and delivering those 100 copies of that software. That was a risk that paid off. Entrepreneurs are defined by risk and innovation. And your story to success as a tremendously successful entrepreneur, coach, business owner, software builder, author, speaker, you can see that risk and innovation coming through in your story. So it's an honor to know you. It's an honor to be coached by you. And I think it's an honor, of course, to have you on the show so that everybody else can get a little bit of the Mitch Russo story and the treatment to know what it is they can do to improve their life as an entrepreneur. So I asked this question of everybody at the end of each show, and I'm going to ask you as well, Mitch. So you've got, thousands and thousands of people listen to this show on a regular basis. And there are people that are sitting there who have already created 10, 20, 30, $50 million companies, and they're doing great. But then there's also people that are just sitting on the edge, they're on the sidelines looking, can I make it as an entrepreneur? What would you say to that person? What advice would you give to him or her about, should I start as an entrepreneur? What do I do? Can I make it? How do I do it?
So Jason, I've reached the ripe old age of 67 years old, and I've learned some lessons along the way. Some of my early actions were based on fear that I wouldn't have enough when I got older, fear that I would disappear into obscurity, and so those are in the early days is what drove me, to be honest. I grew up in a family which was financially challenged, let's put it that way, and I watched my mom have to go back to work when us little kids had no control to help her. And so a lot of what my sister and I both did is we made decisions that never will we be poor. So I think part of our upbringing is what sort of creates our drive, if you will, as children. But later in life, that fear of not enough was something I needed to overcome. And it was only later in life that I realized that the true reason that you should do anything is to be happy. And if you are happy working for the man, as they say, if you are happy getting a salary there's nothing wrong with that, because with that comes some freedom too, because at 5 o'clock, your obligation is over. If you're going to start a company, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, then part of what you're signing up for is you're signing up for risk. You're signing up for the opportunity to try and possibly fail. The difference between a good entrepreneur and a bad entrepreneur is the ones that fail quickly and quit don't go back to being entrepreneurs. The ones who fail quickly and pivot are the ones who will be successful. So if you have it in your heart where you truly want to create a life for yourself that you don't have now, then be prepared, have some money in the bank, be committed to your vision, as Jason said. That's why they call him the real Jason Duncan, by the way. And then from there, make some decisions about what happens if this idea fails. Now, truthfully, you won't know until it does what will actually happen or where you will go. But be prepared for that to happen, because odds are it will.
Well, thank you, Mitch. And I appreciate you giving that insight. I 100% agree. And for that entrepreneur out there who's wanting and waiting and guessing, there's some advice. Rewind this on your podcast player, go back on YouTube, rewatch this, listen to what Mitch said there. There's gold in that advice. So Mitch, how would people get in touch with you?
Well, they can go to mitchrusso.com, of course. That's right. That's really my main site. They call that an authority site because it's really not selling anything. It just talks about, I have over 500 interviews and blog posts on that site. So you could curl up for quite a while and learn from not just me, but from all the people that I've interviewed over the years, of which there's over 350 at this point. So
well, go to mitchrusso.com. That's mitchrusso.com. And again, if you haven't watched this on YouTube, I want you to go check this out. Mitch is a guy that you should be paying attention to. He's done a lot of amazing things over the last 40 years, and he's got a lot more coming. I mean, or 30 years, and he's got a lot more coming. And I think that you can benefit from him, which is why I had him on the show. So Mitch, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you on the show. And again, like I said at the top, it's an honor to have you as my coach. I appreciate you very, very much.
My pleasure, Jason.
Well, there you have it, listeners. Another successful entrepreneur. Mitch Russo is fantastic. I honestly am blessed to know him, blessed to got introduced to him to help me build not only this show, but my online university, my coaching platform has a lot to do with Mitch's guidance. And that guidance comes from wisdom, and his wisdom comes from his experience over the last 30 plus years of starting companies, building companies, growing and selling companies, and now coaching other people just like me to do the same thing. And as he said, you've got to be able to take that risk. You've got to be able to know that you're going to pivot. Don't let fear keep you from doing what you need to do. Now, I truly, truly believe that entrepreneurs are the ones that change the world. And I do coaching. Part of one of the businesses, I own 8 businesses, and one of the businesses I own is a coaching company called Results Through Integrity. You can go to rticoach.com and read about that. But part of what I do to give back to the entrepreneurial community is once a week, every week, I give away one free coaching session to one entrepreneur somewhere around the world. It's the real Jason Duncan with a real entrepreneur working through one real problem. And I do that as a way to help you work through some issue that you've got, good, bad, or otherwise. I'll help you work through that. If you're interested in that, go to therealjasonduncan.com/free coaching. That's therealjasonduncan.com/free coaching. You can sign up to get your one free session. I do one a week, and it could be you. So make sure you go to therealjasonduncan.com/free coaching and check that out. All right. So on our next episode of The Root of All Success, I'll be interviewing another super successful entrepreneur or an up and comer, and we'll talk with that person about his or her journey to success, how they're going to be successful or how they became successful. So make sure you tune in again next time. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast on your podcast player, make sure to go do that. Leave me a 5-star review if you don't mind. If you think we're worthy of that, I would appreciate it. And if you haven't watched this on YouTube, go to youtube.com/C/TheRealJasonDuncan. I'll see you on the next episode. And until then, remember, Jesus is King.
Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we invite you to visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Take charge of your business. Grow it from great to incredible. Join us again next time here on The Root of All Success.